So yesterday I showed a video where I took a spreadsheet like this and then created a glossary from it using the glossary converter. I went through a lot of details, but if I just do it very quickly so you can see what I did, because it's pretty straightforward really. I just take my glossary, my Excel glossary, I add it into here, simple bilingual glossary, and exit. There's my term base. If I then come back to Studio and I click on my project, or the project that I actually want to open here, which is this one, I've got no term base at the moment, and I go to my project settings. In fact, let me not do that. Let me click on down here under term recognition and go to project term base settings. It takes you straight to the right place. I could have done it through project settings, but this is obviously easier. It saves you a bit of navigation. I browse. There's my glossary that I've just created. Click on OK. OK. And there's my terms that I'm now getting. This is the glossary that's been created using the glossary converter. So it was an Excel spreadsheet that just contained a few terms. This is what I did in more detail in the previous one. What I wanted to show here is that if I'd done this and I now wanted to make some changes to this, how could I extend this term base so I had a bit more information in there? So for example, a question that came up on Prose today was how could I add a client name at the entry level and a few notes to each term. So if I wanted to be able to do that, again I could use a glossary converter, but rather than show the glossary converter again, I wanted to show you how to do it in MultiTerm, because MultiTerm does make things quite a bit easy sometimes, and it manages the whole process for you. So I'm just going to remove that glossary from there for the time being, and I'm going to go and open MultiTerm. So if I come back here and I double click on the glossary that I've just created, so this opens up MultiTerm for me. I'm using MultiTerm 2014, so hopefully most of you have got this anyway. And here's my simple term base. So here's my 4 terms that I've got in here, and it is just that. If I go down to my term base management, this would say catalog if you're using 2009 or 2011. In here you can see that the definition is very simple. The entry structure is just adding terms, and that's it. So what I want to do is I want to add some things here to make the definition a little bit more interesting. So to do that, I can either right click and say edit the existing definition, or if I've got 2014 I can just click on edit. Actually, interestingly enough, if you click on that, cancel that just to show you, this button still says the selected catalog object. This used to say catalog down here, so perhaps the buttons don't quite match some of the other changes we've done to try and make it a little bit more, a little bit clearer for people to use. But click on edit anyway. Then next. There's my languages that I've got at the moment, and you can see I've got no descriptive fields in here at all. So I'm going to add a couple of descriptive fields. I'm going to add 2. I'm going to add one for the client, so I'll just call that client, and I'm going to add a notes field. Whoops, notes field, and then I'm going to take the fields that I've just added, client and notes, and I'm going to add these into the entry structure. So at the entry level I'm going to add the name client, because I want my client's name to be added to each term when I add it. It could be anything. And then the notes name, I'm going to add this at term level, so I add that. So I've now added the client field that I've just created and the notes field that I've just created into the entry structure, or into the definition of the database. Okay, so you can see now if I look at my entry structure, I've now got a client field at the entry level, and in addition to the term name I've now got a notes field, and I can have multiple ones in each case because that's what I selected. So if I go back to my terms, if I go to click a new term now, add new term, it brings up the term base exactly as it would before, but this time I have a little drop down box, and if I click on that I have client that's added, so I could add a client in here, say Dell. I don't know if Dell if Dell happened to be my client. I could add an English term, so let's say computer, and then I could add to that a note that says a piece of hardware that makes your life easier. sometimes. Okay, so I've now added 2 bits of information to that particular term. The French, actually I have no idea what French is for computer. What's French for computer? Maybe I'll just have a quick look. I guess I should have looked at that before I started. And knowing my luck, it will probably turn out to be exactly the same. No, it's not. I don't know if that's correct though, but I'm going to use this so that I have a different word in my term base. So we're going to call it ordinateur. A piece of hardware that makes your life easier. Let's just take that and we'll add that in French. So I've just used Google Translate for that, by the way, so for all of that. So if it's not a very good translation, that's why. And I'm now going to save that. So now what I've got against that particular term is I've got some additional fields. Now the interesting thing for that is that when I added new, when I did that, I couldn't see them straight away. I had to click on the drop down, which can make it a little awkward because you have to keep clicking on things whenever you want to add new terms. What would be better would be if the input model we were using actually gave you the fields that you actually wanted to add every single time you did it. So to do that, you need a new input model. At the moment I've only got the default, so there's no input model there. So if I go back to my term base and then go to my input model and then say create new, I can also right click and say create, next, and I'll call this multivariance thing. Here's my entry level, and the description says select an item from the input model tree. This is the input model tree, and right click to add fields to your input model. So I'm going to right click on here and say I'm double clicking the term, by the way. So I've added my 2 languages, English and French, that I want in this particular input model. I'm going to right click and say add client at entry level, and under my terms add notes. So I'm creating an input model that displays all of these things by default. I'm also making it possible to have multiple ones of these. So I click on finish there, and there's my new input model. And if I go back to my terms and I click on the drop down box, you can see I now have a new input model there, the one I've just created. And if I click on multivariate and now say add new, this time when the term comes up, this information is already available for me to just click on it straight away. So I can just add it in, and I haven't got to go picking on the individual little drop downs, which also means I wouldn't forget it because they're in my face as I'm working. So that's how you'd add the additional fields. And if I just close that now, and I then go back to Studio, and I come back to my term base settings, and I add browse the glossary back in again. This is my corrected glossary. This time you can see the input model is also available. My new term is in their computer, and because I've got the input model selected, multivarious, if I was to save a term, so say for example, let's take term base and base terminologique, right click, add new term, or control F2. When I add the new term this time, I've also got the model that I came to. So the client might be prose, say for example. Term base is a custom dictionary. Custom dictionary to help you organize your glossaries, for example. And in French, that would be, if I cheat a bit, I won't say in French, I should say that the French, according to Google, is that one, and save it. So I'm now adding my terms with the client and with the notes as I'm working through the glossary. So that's how you could change the term base that you've already created in order to be able to work with it. Now, one thing I would add to that, and let me just open up. Oh, sorry, not Total Commander. Let me use Windows Explorer so it's familiar. I double-click the glossary. Sometimes, if you've got a particular big term base, you might find that even after having done this, existing terms don't provide you all the terms, all of the different fields that you've just added. If that happens, the simple solution is normally just to run a reorganize on the term base. So you just click on reorganize. Okay, next. So it could take a few minutes. This is quick because I've only got 4 or 5 terms in there. Next, and I finish. That's it. And then you'll find that when you come back into it, most likely all of the things that you wanted to get access to will now be available. And that's it. So not too complicated. Hope that was useful.